Okay. I'm gonna do a really quick example just so you get an idea of what we're doing, and then I'm gonna move on to a little bit more of a complicated example here. So when you get your subjects for the low poly project printed out, see how mine is scaled up almost to the size of the paper. It's a little bit smaller, but not too bad. You're gonna wanna grab a Sharpie and then obviously have this image out. And then just like we discussed on that PowerPoint, we are going to want to look for three things here, working from number one, moving on to number two, to number three. So shapes, form, and then low poly. That way we set it all up and it's good to go here. So thing number one, I want to look for our main shapes here. So obviously we have the outside of the apple, so kind of the circle. I'm going to go in and using straight lines. I know that's confusing because this is a rounded edge, but if we're working with polygons, we're going to be using lines, okay? Straight lines to make those polygons. So I'm going to lay a line down, and then an anchor point would appear if we were on Illustrator, okay? And then I'm going to lay another line, anchor point, another line, anchor point, another line, anchor point, another line, anchor point, until I make it all the way around my apple here. That is a main shape, the outside edge of my apple. Other main shape would be the outside of my artboard here. So I could go around and lay that out. I'm not gonna do this for this demo's sake. We have the table. So I could go lay an anchor point, draw my line, anchor point, draw my line, and I would go all the way around. Again, this would be the outside edge of my artboard, which I would already have lined up. So this is another main shape. I'll go ahead and do the background just so you can see. I'm counting my background here as a main shape. Still using straight lines because we want to make polygons later on. What other main shapes do I have? I'm going to count this inside where the apple's dipping kind of as a main shape. We have a pretty significant color change here from where it's going from red to yellow. I'm going to go ahead and add that in as a main shape too. It's pretty important, so I want to include it. I have the shadow here, which is a pretty important shape. It's a very quick color jump from this lighter piece of wood to where the shadow hits, gets dark pretty quick. I'm going to go ahead and add that in. Notice how I'm being pretty mindful of trying to connect anchor points I already have. This will be important when we get started on Illustrator. We'll talk a little bit more about it, that you want anchor points to touch and paths to cross. So good habit to get into now. What else could I count as a main shape here? I could group off this section back here. This is a really big tint or highlight of this table. I'm going to go ahead and break that up, drop an anchor point. And then I have a pretty big tint or highlight here of my apple. I'm going to make this one a main shape. Messed up there. I'm also going to make this one a main shape here. Just very simple. Oops, forgot my anchor point. And then there is a little bit of a shadow down here, and I want to include it. I feel like it's enough, an important enough piece that I'm like, yeah, let's go ahead and grab that in there. So pretty much we got most of the main shapes in here. I could break up different portions of my background. I could group off this dark area, this darker area, but for this demo's sake, this is good. So we've done the main shapes. Feel like I've exhausted all my shape options. I'm gonna say, yes, we're done there. Now we need to move on to the form. If you feel more comfortable doing this part in pencil first, You could do that. If you feel pretty confident, you could do Sharpie. So let's think about if the apple was actually physically here. I wish I had a real apple. What's the shape of an apple, right? It's a sphere. It's rounded, has curved edges, and it goes back into space. So we want to pretend that this is a real apple, and how would that form look in front of us? I know that an apple curves, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a curve on there. Kind of thinking about how I feel like that would curve in real life. So I did one right in the center. I'm going to do one kind of in the center going this way. Notice though, we have this area that dips in. So an apple at the top dips into where that stem's at. So I'm going to kind of make a little bit of a softer curve coming in. So I'm thinking about how that curve starts to move into the apple. I'm going to add another one going in this opposite direction. I know that this portion of my apple is probably curving in a little bit. This portion is probably curving in. I have little curves happening back here that are heading into my apple. I could draw, this section is probably kind of curving up and out, right? Heading in that direction. I'm gonna do one more curve back here. I know that my table is kind of flat, right? So it's heading back. I could add in some guidelines that are just kind of heading back into space, just as a guideline. I'm gonna put some arrows here. And then this is just flat. We don't know what all's back there. So I'm gonna leave that be. Draw one more. That would also be an arrow. So I have some guidelines set up for the curve of the apple, how I feel like it would curve in space, and then some guidelines for my table here. I'm gonna go back in and make some of this a little bit more permanent with my Sharpie. Again, thinking in terms of straight lines and trying to use my anchor points and paths that I already have. So I could come down here and connect these two because it's following this curve line I made. I could add, let's do one coming down this way, anchor point this way. This is heading back, heading back, heading back to this anchor point. So you can see I'm starting to follow that curve of the apple. I'm gonna come in again, try to line that up to some of my anchor points here. I'm gonna cut this one through. And I'm gonna bring it, I'm gonna make a new anchor point back here. I'm gonna start doing the opposite lines now. So I'm gonna take some of these in. This is coming in and connecting those anchor points. This guy's coming in. This guy's coming in. I have these side lines that I made. I'm trying to think about how I can connect some of these already prior made anchor points. I'm gonna drop a new one here. Put that guy in. This is starting to curve back. I'm hitting a lot of these anchor points, which is good. This one's gonna go through some of these main anchor points I made earlier, which is good. I'm gonna drop another one. This one's kind of running through some of those major ones too. So you can see that I'm starting to already make some polygons here, right? Thinking about the form, how all these lines kind of bend together. For my table, I could just take a couple straight back. I could take a line straight back to this one, up another anchor point straight back to that one. I'm gonna make a line that goes through both of these anchor points. Another one here. I'm gonna do one that connects there, here, and I'm gonna take this one to here. It's kind of guiding my eyes in that direction. So we've followed most of the form. I could set up more form lines if I wanted to. I could come back through and connect some of these other ones to try to follow the curve of my apple here. But it's a good start, okay? So once I feel like I've gone and checked the form of everything, I feel like I followed the shape, and I've given myself enough guidance to kind of reconfigure the form of that. See, I forgot this middle one. This is why we're checking. I'm gonna take these ones in. to an anchor point. There we go. So you want to just set up how that form is going to look. This is the most important part because if you don't think about how it looks in the three-dimensional real life space, and you don't try to set it up in the way that it would look, it's going to fall very flat. If I just went across with a bunch of straight triangles all the way across, it's going to feel very flat and not look like an apple. Okay. So the form, setting up the form, thinking about how it would look if it was right here in front of us is very important. So I feel like I've checked everything. There's not really anything to go off for the background. That table is kind of flat, so I'm trying to make those lines feel like they're going back. And my apple is rounded, so I'm trying to round out some of these lines. So I'm going to check that one off my list. Now this is when we can start turning it into low poly. So we want 75% to be triangles, right? You can see I've already got some triangles going on. I can break it down even further into more triangles if I wanted to, but I definitely need to break some more up in here. Triangles are a little bit tricky as well. Try to think about the direction it's going to move our eye in. So I start kind of lining some up. I'm going to do some in pencil first here. I could split this area up this way, or I could split it up this way. If I split it up this way, it's kind of moving my eye down in that direction. If I split it up this way, it's moving my eye up and out, which I feel like is following that curve shape of my apple. So I'm going to go ahead and set my line up heading out in this direction to pull my eye out in that direction. So I'm going to add that line in instead of this one. I'm going to do the opposite way down here, so that way it's pulling my eye down. I'm kind of reflecting this area of my apple because I feel like this is that center line. So I want it to reflect a little bit across that. I'm going to take a line down this way to pull our eyes down versus going up this way. You could do it that way because then we would pull our eyes up, but I want to continue pulling the viewer's eyes down. And I have this line up here that's pulling up and across. So I want to mimic that down here as well. I'm going to pull down here. I want to pull my eye here. I'm starting to just pull some of these lines on the outer side of my apple or the outer edge of my apple out. In the middle, it gets a little bit tricky to think about what could I do here. You could leave some of these as not triangles, or you could go in and split some of them up. So if I do that one going this way, I want to reflect over that line and do that one going the other way. Let's see, what do we have going on over here? Let's do this one, pulling down, pulling down. I'm gonna do this one going this way. Some of it is just gonna be what feels best to you, but sometimes thinking about the intentional movement, excuse me, of which direction you could pull your line out to will help create the overall shape of this. Split this guy up into two. The more you break up some of your polygons, the more detail, because every section you're going to pull a color through. Pull, this spot is hard. I'm gonna leave that actually. We'll leave it as is. Down here, not as important. We do want to move our eyes if this table was flat and heading back behind our apple. I am trying to pull your eyes in that direction, as you can see with some of these longer lines. So it would be kind of weird if I broke up a triangle heading this way. So I might just do another long one heading back, pulling your eye back in that direction. I'm gonna do one here. I'm gonna do one here. And again, think about reflecting over, especially if you have an object centered that is mostly symmetrical. So I'm reflecting this line over here, and then I also placed a line over here. So I'm trying to repeat that a little bit. I could break this section up, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave it. And then background details. I want my apple, the subject, so whatever your subject is, to be the most detailed. Break it down into the most polygons. So the background you could leave as a solid color. I feel like there's a good variety of color back here, so I could section it off into some bigger polygons. Just that way I grab a little bit more color and it gives your image a little bit more visual interest. Let's break this up here. This guy here. I could split this up. That would be an anchor point. And I could also split this up. Just some bigger triangles happening back there. Once you feel like you've hit that 75%, I could split some of these up a little bit more if I feel like I don't have enough. Those are mostly triangles back there with the exception of a few. Then you are good to go here. Okay, so main shapes first. Move on to the form. How would that look if it was here in front of us? And then low poly. For time's sake, I was gonna do this image again, thinking about these exact things here. I'm not gonna do main shapes. Well, I don't know. Let me think about this. If you feel confident enough to move on from this image to starting on your own, feel free to do that. I'm going to go over parts of this frog really quickly just because it's a little bit more complex. I'm not going to talk about the tree or the background like I did for this one, just to speed it up a little bit. If you're still kind of confused, hang out, watch the frog, or you can always come back to this later. Okay, main shapes. I'm going to get a different color here. Let me get this copper. We have the frog's eye, and I'm not going to do straight lines for this also for time's sake, but for your practice, it needs to be like this. We have the eye, I have the other portion of his eye. I have the center part of his eyeball, the iris. I feel like I could split off his arm here. That kind of sounds a little bit morbid. Could split off his little fingers. His leg back here is the main shape. I'm even going to break up where his leg bends. His body is very much so a main shape. I'm going to split up that portion of his body from his leg. I'm going to grab his other leg down here. Down here. Get his little toes. Like his knee comes up. I'm going to split this section off just like I did up here. Toe to toe. I'm going to split that. This portion of his arm is a little bit different. I'm going to split his finger. His hand has a very big crease there. And I really want to get good detail out of this. So I'm even going to go as far as kind of sectioning off this curve of his head over here. I'm going to section off his mouth. I'm going to section off. We have like a blue color of his leg that I want to get. So I'm going to make that a main shape. We also have that down here. We have that happening on his back a little bit. I'm going to grab some of these bigger shadows. We have kind of a shadow happening here, down here. So you can already see how much more I'm breaking this up. You have so much more just because this is more complex than the apple. That's why we start with that. You really want to think about what's important to include here. What do I definitely want to capture? Because setting up these guidelines before you actually start breaking it up into triangles is so important. Okay, this is pretty good for the demo. I could keep going because I'm crazy and I like detail. Got a lot of good main shapes. Of course, I would get the background, the shadow, the tree, but right now I just want to focus on this guy. So how do we think about him in terms of his form? Again, I'm going to take my pencil and think about how he looks in space. So I know his nose is probably coming out in front of us a little bit. His body is probably curving down. So I'm thinking about what shape would that make? How is his body contorting, right? I know that this portion of his body is probably, oops, curved a little bit, and then that side's heading away from us. Down here by his little frog butt, it's curving away from us. Up here, I feel like is curving away a little bit. His knee is probably rounded a little bit towards us, and then maybe this is rounded away. His arm is probably a curved object, right? And his little fingers, phalanges, whatever you want to call them. His knee is probably curved up here, this portion of his leg. This might have a little curve to it. His toes. So you really want to think about every individual section, in this case, appendage for our frog. Because not everything is heading in the same direction, right? His arm curves differently in the direction that his body curves. So we definitely want to set up different guidelines for different areas. This portion of him probably curves up, his little snout. This probably curves down a little bit. You got like a chubby cheek. This might dip down, usually right here on a frog's face, dips down a little bit, then curves back up by the eyes. I'm doing a really weird line there. So much more complex than our apple, right? We have lots of twists and turns. Our frog has many, many lumps. And again, I could go through and start setting all of that up, same way we just did our apple, and then break him up into triangles here. But I'm gonna go ahead and stop. I just wanted you to see how many more main shapes you could grab with a complex object and how much more complex the form of it could be, right? If you have questions about how your form goes back into space or what would be a good main shape, let me know. Ask a neighbor, right? You have great, great group members in your pods. Definitely refer to them. Okay. Sorry that was really long, but it's important. Yeah. Happy tracing. I'm excited to see what your subjects are.